Good evening and welcome to tonight's In Conversation Live. My name is Henrietta Bowden-Jones. I am the Psychiatry Section President here at the Royal Society of Medicine, and I'm delighted tonight to introduce our guest, Baroness Beeban Kidron OBE. Now, before I read out her biography to you, I want to just remind you all that the Q&A function works beautifully. It's in real time. So if you ask questions, and don't be shy about asking, I can absolutely and immediately put these questions to Beeban. Okay, so Baroness Beeban Kidron OBE, British filmmaker, founder and chair of Five Rights Foundation and Crossbench Life peer in the House of Lords. During her filmmaking career, Kidron directed many feature films, television dramas and documentaries, including the BAFTA-winning drama Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, as well as, of course, the Bridget Jones' The Edge of Reason. In 2006, Kidron founded Into Film, previously called Film Club, an educational charity which sets up after-school film clubs in schools around England and Wales. She's the founder and chair of Five Rights Foundation, a charity that works to create policy and practical solutions to build the digital world children and young people truly deserve. Five Rights has pioneered a range of international policies and programs, such as developing a child online protection policy for the government of Rwanda and working in partnership with IEEE to create universal standards for children and for digital services and products. Kidron is a member of the UN Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development, the Global Council for Extended Intelligence, and the UNICEF Artificial Intelligence and Child Rights Policy Guidance Group. She's also an advisor to the Duncan McCann in his current court case against Google for misusing children's data. Beeban, welcome. How lovely to have you here.
Thank you.
The last time we were together, I think, was in the back of a taxi trying to get something sorted that was urgent, as always. I'm going to start by taking you all the way back to your primary school years. I would really love to know, what type of child were you?
Oh, that's always a difficult question. I think the answer is a grumpy one. I think a lot of my childhood I spent reading, and a lot of my childhood when I was very young, I lived in the country and I spent riding, and my very best friend was a horse called Timmy that was at the local riding school. And I think all my sort of warmest memories were things about, you know, to do with that part of life, with an animal, with, you know, taking care of something and so on, which is something when my family returned to London that really wasn't sort of central to an urban life. So I have a bit of a romantic idea about that, actually.
And do you feel that looking back now with hindsight, there were personality traits already visible in your younger years that would have indicated this, you know, trajectory that has led you to accomplish so much in your life and doing it so well?
Well, I don't know about doing so much and doing so well, but I think there were a couple of very defining features in my family and in my early life. I think, you know, the first bit is that I came from a very particular family. My parents were quite radical. They were publishers, and the house was always full of ideas and people who wanted to change the world. And so I think I grew up in an environment where changing the world was an obligation rather than
I love it. Yeah.
Rather than an obstacle. So I think that's one very important thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other thing that was completely defining was that actually I was born with a cleft palate, and then I had various childhood operations. And at the age when I went from primary to secondary school, I had a year where I couldn't speak at all. And I think there's two things that are important about that. One is, you know, the person who doesn't speak gets to see. And I think I saw a lot at that particular time in my life that still is with me, if you like, in my imagination. And the other thing is, someone gave me a camera.
Yes, yes, and well, fantastic. So, but before we move on to the camera, if I just stay with you and this environment, this very rich intellectual environment with people on a mission to accomplish things, would you say that that is one of the most defining things about your early life? Would you say that potentially it was something that led you to where you are now more than anything else?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a really interesting question. I think the answer is yes, definitely. And I think that, I think there are some things that I have as an adult been able to imagine. So I've been able to imagine that things could be different. And I noticed in policy circles, it's very often the case that people feel hampered by what is. So
Yes.
I think that is the gift. If you had to isolate one thing, it's not about a particular ideology, it's not about a particular book, it's not about a particular set of principles, although all of those things were all around me, and there were lots of people who were very interested in many things. But I think the idea that you don't have to define the end of the journey by where you are right now is a gift that other people perhaps did not have.
Absolutely, I understand that. The ability to see achievement as always ahead of you, as something to strive for. So who gave you this camera? Did they give you the camera because you were watching all the time, or did they give it to you because you know, to make you feel better? What's the story behind that?
So they gave it to me because I was sort of struck dumb. And in fact, one of the things that happened, I was not only allowed not to speak, but I wasn't actually allowed to run about because it would upset my vocal cords, because I had some sort of residual problems with my vocal cords as a result. Anyway, it's a long, complicated story, and I'm worried about saying it in front of many people with medical training. But the result was that a family friend, she was a wonderful landscape photographer called Faye Godwin. She gave me a camera because she thought if I couldn't speak with my voice, then I could speak with my eyes. And that, you know, I always say, because I spend quite a lot of time with young people, and I do always say that you don't know as you go through whether the thing that thwacks you and sort of pushes you off your path is in fact the blessing that will get you to the next bit. And the job of life is to kind of pick it up and make it so. I could not have anticipated that camera would lead me to being a film director, but absolutely, categorically, it did.
Yes, yes, beautiful story. And were you in touch with her through the years? Was she someone who mentored you somehow visually or artistically, or was that just a gift that occurred and then ended in terms of follow-up?
No, she's one of two great photographers, both of them female in my life, but absolutely, she taught me how to make prints. I used to help her in the darkroom. Her work and her interests were very different from mine, actually, as I grew older, but in that I was very, very young. I mean, I was 10, 11,
yes,
this sort of age, and I can still recall the smell of the developer fixer from her darkroom. So absolutely, it was an amazing thing, and I think as long as I live, I'll never forget that sort of beautiful sight of, you know, you put the light on the paper, you turn the paper into the developer, and you turn it over and you watch the image come up.
The magic of the image, which then carried through with all your filmmaking. So from one iconic figure to another, because I'm very well aware that by the time you were a teenager, you had the privilege of spending a couple of years with Eve Arnold. Am I right?
Yes, yes, you
Yeah.
are right, and it was indeed a privilege, and there's a sort of a funny thing. I will say this, and I trust this audience, and you know that for many years that my, you know, one of the security questions they ask you at the bank is, who's your greatest teacher? And I always used to say Eve. Yeah. And I think that is absolutely right. She taught me not only about how to look at things, but she also taught me how to negotiate. She taught me how to pack a bag to travel. You always have to have shoes that you can run in and a dress you can go to the palace in.
Sounds wonderful. Yes.
And my husband says, you know, I still actually pack my bag the way she taught me.
How beautiful.
You know,
Did you travel? Did you travel with her, Beeban? Did she take you anywhere, or was it more a sort of training in terms of what you should be doing?
So that is a really interesting question. I think she did not, and maybe we now, after a year of COVID and Zoom, will understand this better. She took me everywhere, but she didn't. I never left her flat. Because one of the things that one of the jobs I had, or one of the things we used to do, was she would return. And at the time, where she was returning from was China, before it was even open, and Russia and America. And she would come back with her pictures, and it would be put on the carousel, everything she had shot. And we would go round and round and round and round until she edited them down to the pictures that she wanted to put in the magazine. And it would take hours and hours and hours. And so I feel that I went everywhere with her, but I actually went nowhere.
Very good. And out of interest, before we move on to your film school days, did you know at the time that this was a pretty special thing? You were living in the company of such an important individual.
I don't know that I did. I think it's important to say that she first called me and asked me to go and see her, and she'd seen one of my pictures in a magazine. And I went up to her flat and I showed her all my pictures. And at the end of looking through my pictures, she said, "Do you want to be my assistant?" And I said, "Well, actually, I'm going to be 14 tomorrow."
Wow.
And so she rang me on my 16th birthday, and I left school to go work for her. So I think that I was someone who didn't get on very well at school. I had interests and sort of excitements that were not completely caught by school. It's really interesting now, because I do so much academic work, so much reading, so much of my life is sort of academic in nature, but not at that time. And so I think where I felt very lucky was I was doing something I loved, and I was learning and learning, hand over fist. And I was so very young, Etta. I was so very young. I don't think I could have made a judgment like, is this better than that? Because it was all I had.
It just worked. It worked well. It worked well, and it kept you going back for more, which is beautiful. Now, I'm quite keen to. I'm aware that well, I might not be completely correct, but I think you spent some time at Greenham Common. Whether this was before your film school or after, maybe you can tell us. But it'd be wonderful to hear about the sequence of events, getting to film school, and how on earth, how was it? That again, it's having lived through an era, a bit of an era, Beeban, to say that you were back and forth from Greenham Common filming. I mean, I'd love to see the film at some point, but tell us more.
Oh, well, so much to say, but let me do the short version, is that I was very grateful to the then director of the film school, Colin Young. I applied to film school with absolutely no qualifications, but I wrote a very good letter and I sent my pictures, and for some reason he took a shine to me and he let me go. And I think that I thought it was going to be like Fame, I thought everybody would be like me, wanting to change the world. Everybody would be like me, sort of wanting to make beautiful things. So it was much, much more hard-nosed than that. And I had joined as well, as they used to call it at the time, as a cameraman. Yeah. And of course, I was the only female cameraman at that time. And everybody else looked like that they had come out of the womb with a camera in their hand, and I knew relatively nothing because I had been. So I actually went to Greenham with another one of the film school people, Amanda Richardson, in order to learn how to use the camera out of the sight of the boys. Yeah. And I went there, and Amanda and I stayed there from that weekend almost constantly for 7 months.
Incredible. Yeah.
Lived in a mini, because the only way that the school would allow us to keep the equipment was if it was behind locked doors, because they were worried about it being exposed and stolen. And so we lived in a mini for 7 months.
Beautiful. I look forward to seeing a picture of that, of those months. But so, well, okay, so looking back then, and this is before we move on to, you know, your very accomplished films, but looking back on that particular piece of work, what was your message then? What were you trying to achieve in create, you know, 7 months is a lot of time to spend in a place. What were you doing?
I think that it wasn't intentional, the 7 months, but it was absolutely compelling, because that first weekend we went was the weekend that 30,000 people came to hold hands around the base. And again, I remind you how young I was. I was about 20. In fact, I had my 21st birthday at Greenham. And to see the power, and if you put that together with what I've already said about this idea of changing the world, was these people had come and plonked themselves outside, you know, the military industrial complex, as it were, you know, right there. Here we are, we've got absolutely nothing, and we are going to get rid of these weapons. And that was such an extraordinary act. And I think that sort of battle between, you know, the base and the women and the police and the media was just one of the most fascinating things I've ever seen. And in fact, the film becomes actually less about the rights and wrongs of nuclear weapons, but what it actually becomes about is about what does it take to be a community that lives together with, in principle, in the principle and in the practice of that principle. And it's hard, but it is actually, honestly, the only time in my whole life, and I'm, you know, I'm just about to be 60, you know, only time I've actually lived in a community where everybody agreed with what the end result should be. And it might have been quite narrow, that end result, but it was an extraordinary experience.
It is an extraordinary experience just to hear about it. I somehow, and it's, you know, a similar age to you, but when I think about the equivalent happening now, I'd worry that people will start squabbling way before the first month was up, and whether, you know, different perspectives and different points of view might actually turn the experience into less of a united one, as indeed your experience was. Who knows? I mean, it's always easier maybe to, you know, to pontificate about current times in relation to, you know, better times in the past. But anyway,
there was plenty of quarrelling. Believe me, there was plenty of quarreling. There was plenty of difference. And
that makes me feel better. It's not not just happening now. Then.
And when I think of the extraordinary things that young people do now, I actually, you know, I look and I feel warmly towards them.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, as I said, it'd be lovely to watch it sometime. Now, in 1989, you made The Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, and to great acclaim. And I think, you know, a lot of people tonight will have seen the film, will have read the book. A question for you. Do you think film, and I'm not being controversial, I'm just truly wanting to know, do you think films ever do justice to great novels? That was a fantastic autobiographical account, and I just wonder whether you feel that, that regularly films can do that, or yours certainly did. Was it a rare occurrence?
So I think that it's important to think about who the audience is. I mean, the people who came to Oranges on TV would never have picked up that novel. Yeah. And I do feel fortunate, that the audience that loved the book also loved the TV show. That is a good thing. And it's definitely a good thing for me, because I wasn't involved in the first and I wasn't involved in the second. But I do think that it's important to think about audience, and also think about audience in terms of, what are you trying to do? Sometimes you're trying to make them feel good, make them understand, make them reach out, make them go further. Sometimes you're trying to make them not forget. There's so many different things. And sometimes you're just trying to make people feel like they can laugh out loud. And every now and again you do something which does a whole bunch of those together. And that is a glorious feeling for you as a maker. It's a glorious feeling for the audience. But to sort of answer your question really directly is I think, to say that the adaptations of things, if they're lousy and cynical, they're lousy and cynical. What can I say? But actually, if they're done for good purpose and they are actually reaching out to bring a new audience to a set of ideas they may not have come across, that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And that's what I think most people who are trying to do that are trying to do.
Yeah. And on that note, then, talking about bringing things to audiences, how do you feel about things like Netflix? Are they good? Is it okay? Is it okay to watch? I often hear of people who are binge watching several episodes, wonderful episodes, one after the other, loving it, and nothing pathological about that. But how does that? or of course there can be, but in general, nothing wrong with a bit of good TV watching. How do you feel as a more traditional filmmaker, before moving as you are in politics, about all this world changing?
Well, I think there are some things that I think we have to look at, in those forms. But fundamentally, I don't think it's a good-bad binary. It really is not. What I would say, and I probably feel it very passionately, is that the isolation and the idea of everybody as an individual and everybody as an island, is not great for humanity. Yeah. And therefore what film traditionally did was it brought you into the film palace, and the lights went down and you put your hand in your popcorn and you all experienced it together. And I can't tell you how many times as an audience, not as a filmmaker, but as an audience, at the end of something, I've turned around to the person next to me or been crying or laughing out loud, and you get that joyous feeling. I even remember a couple of films, in Times Square in New York, where the whole audience got up and danced,
Wow. Yeah. That beautiful image. Yeah.
I think those things are really, really important. And I think that we have to make sure that our cultural churches go the way of our churches. But
absolutely.
Nothing wrong, with a bit of binging and a great TV show. I think there's something, maybe I might have some arguments about the data.
Yes. Not good, not necessarily all good or all bad. And actually, you've just reminded me of my whole life. I have grown up with the butcher taking out the plastic chairs in the square, in the local village square in Italy, putting up a white sheet, and there we were, film night for the village. So those are very important communal times. But so fantastic to hear your image of New York and the dancing in the cinema. So just I want to just one more thing before I move on to your more current life and interests and dedications. You did start the film club that turned into film, and what a special thing to do. I would love to know, maybe if you could tell us a little bit about it and where it's at now. Is it still happening? Are children benefiting from this?
Yeah. Oh, well, I think it actually follows on absolutely brilliantly from your last question, because my reason for starting it was to do with the idea. I happened to be somewhere where someone who was involved in trying to get teenage boys to read, was bemoaning the fact and talking about things. And I said, I just don't understand. We are culturally, there is this thing where we talk to one another, we tell from stories, in an oral tradition, and generations speak to each other. And I don't know why you don't just start with film. People think of film in a very narrow way, but over 100 years, films have actually told absolutely every story, from space and maths to heartbreak, to migration. I mean, there is not a subject that hasn't been covered, either brilliantly or adequately by film. And that was my idea. You say, you have the communal experience, you don't test children, you give them something that is theirs and they can share. And the club was as important as the film.
Yes.
And build their knowledge. And to be honest, the quick answer to your question is that it will shortly be available in every state school in the UK.
Incredible.
And it has been over the years. I think it's 16, 17 years. I can't remember. I stood down from the board only a year or so ago. But hundreds of thousands of children have been involved. And I really do believe in that collective practice, and the practice of storytelling as a communal activity is something we should count as precious.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you for telling us more about that. I think on this note, I'll take a big leap and come to the charity work that is now very much a focus. So the idea of building a digital world for children and young people that they deserve, something that is safe. The Five Rights Foundation, now you founded that, you're the chair of that. I would love to hear more about the work that the foundation does to promote the rights of young people and children online.
Yeah, so I had, I had a very sort of important personal light bulb moment, if you like, pain of consciousness, the thing that you understand that you can't then unravel from your own mind. And it was while I was making a documentary, because I have gone sort of, this way and that way, and as you said in your introduction, and I made a documentary called In Real Life, and it was about teenagers and the internet. And in the course of making it, I spent hundreds of hours with teenagers in their bedrooms, doing everything that you can imagine, from watching pornography to falling in love to going to meetups, doing creative things, you name it, they were doing it. And I also went on a journey looking at how it was hardwired. Everyone sort of at the time thought of it as sort of, in the ether, in the cloud, up there somewhere. And actually, I thought it was really important that we understand that it's cables and servers and wholly owned and wholly engineered. Because if it's wholly engineered, then we get to choose how it's engineered. And if it's wholly engineered, we have to start asking, why is it engineered in a way that doesn't recognize children? Because that was what happened to me. I was in New York, I was talking to one of the so-called fathers of the internet, and he just said this thing, and it was like a mantra at the time. It was like, there are no gatekeepers, it's a democratizing technology, and all users are equal. When he said all users are equal, I had like a sort of a funny moment where all those hundreds of hours of sitting in bedrooms sort of came back, and I went, well, no, all users aren't equal. Some users are children. And so the whole Five Rights ethos is really about saying, actually, if you don't design the digital world for advertising and for a slightly suspect business model, but you actually design it around child development, around child rights, around child needs, to meet those needs, where would you come out? And what we battle for, and indeed what I battle for as a politician, you know, in the House of Lords, is for that to come much closer to what we have now. And I, you know, I can tell you any number of projects, but I mean, they literally range from, you know, we are helping the Council on the Rights of the Child with an addendum, a general comment on the Convention of the Rights of the Child to show how it's relevant to the digital world, because children's rights are not being observed. Yeah. And that means that states have to report about it. I introduced with colleagues in the House of Lords the first standalone child data protection regime, which people don't really understand, because you know, data protection is a bit of a sweet spot for nerds, but it is one of the most powerful ways of changing the actual design of the system. We're doing terms and conditions, age-appropriate terms and conditions with the IEEE all over the world. We've got engineers working on what that would look like. And we've done some very interesting work, you know, trying to really help people understand what the issues are. And one such project is called Risky by Design. You can look at it on our website. And what it does is it shows how layers of risk, you know, start adding up and adding up and adding up, and put children at risk in ways that we really shouldn't allow. And let me give you just one example. In any other circumstances, the idea that a corporation would routinely introduce strange adults to young children would be preposterous. Yeah, but that's a norm, and it's a norm that they are doing in plain sight of parents, politicians, kids. It happens thousands of times. And you know, and so on and so on.
And on and on and on. Yes. In fact, once you start opening that can, there are thousands of worms to follow up on. I just wanted to say a lovely thing. I'll just read someone called Rhonda Moore says that she appreciates this perspective as a medical anthropologist interested in immersive storytelling and technology in youth. She's got another meeting, has to go, but she thinks your journey is so inspiring. Will this be filmed? Well, we are filming you, so you know she can sort of keep it for posterity. She's a program officer working in global mental health at the US National Institute for Health. And can you link up? So we at the RSM will send you the link. Isn't this wonderful that, you know, it reaches so far and wide in terms of how everyone feels how right it is. And certainly when I joined your team for that piece of work we did on the rights of children, it opened my eyes so much, because actually, despite leading two clinics that are very much focused on harm and protecting children and young people, a lot of these things I hadn't even considered. So you're right in saying that, you know, we almost need to be re-educated about matters to do with safety online. Now, I will ask you about developing the child online protection policy for the government of Rwanda. There's got to be an interesting story here. So go ahead and explain it to us before we carry on.
Yeah, so it does seem like a sort of a little step. What happened is I'm a member of the Broadband Commission for the Sustainable Development Goals, and the UN set up the commission to make sure that as the world got connected, that the parts of the world that are not yet connected were not left behind. And there was the idea that actually, you know, as ambitious as the sustainable development goals are, that actually there was no real chance of delivering on any of them health, education, you know, and all of them, unless communities got connected. Now, that's a really interesting tension that I spend a lot of my life, you know, both globally and in the UK, discussing, and we may come back to it. But in that environment, we had a Broadband Commission meeting in Kigali. And every time I go anywhere, I mean, I now no longer go anywhere, but every time I go anywhere over the last 6 or 8 years, I always ask to see the ICT minister and the education minister, and if there is such a thing, the families minister. And so I did my little round, and the ICT minister of the day said to me, we are just doing a child online protection policy, and I wonder if you would look at it. And I did take a look at it, and I said, I think that maybe if you're happy that we do so, we could maybe help you, and we could maybe help work with you. And I did a series of meetings in the UK. We did a series of meetings with children, academics, health professionals, politicians in Rwanda. I worked with Professor Julia Davidson from East London, and we did a number of workshops because, and in fact, as part of the whole project, and it was a very sort of wonderful moment, was that I asked, and Police Scotland agreed, because they have a specialization in child online protection in Scotland, to train some of the chief police enforcement and justice people from the Rwandan government. And in fact, they came to Scotland and did a week of immersive.
Brilliant.
So the whole thing is like that. And we are now, just interestingly, I hope, doing another layer of that. And we've been asked by so many countries around the world to do something similar for them. We decided we couldn't do that, it was outside our remit. But what we are doing is writing a global child online protection handbook. And half of it is about what your policy should be, and half of it is best practice from all over the world.
I'm really delighted to hear that. One of the issues that our fields tend to cross is around age verification. You will remember about a year or two ago, there was a massive hoo-ha about the fact that as age verification and self-exclusion measures improve in this country, industry targets countries that are less protected, where children are not protected for all the reasons you've just mentioned. And I live with a constant state of anxiety that the issues that we're dealing with here, like gambling disorder, gaming disorder, etc., will be rife in other places, just as we start controlling them here, because there's no accountability. So hearing about your mission is very, very reassuring. Now, there are some more messages. I want to read you some of these because they're so beautiful. Someone said, this is so inspiring, just amazing. Thank you so much. Someone else says, I'm proud to be part of this program, listening to you speak. I'm a 21-year-old freelance filmmaker, and wanting advice in terms of getting to be a good filmmaker like you, and hoping to be, you know, as great as you are. So that's really lovely to have someone say that. Someone else is saying that great data protection is currently happening at United Nations, King Abdullah Economic City, King Salman Solar City, Nuclear Resource Ambassador. Sorry, I'm just reading you some messages. Why not? You can sort of chase some of these up with the RSM if you're interested. But so you know, you're really reaching a lot of people here. Talking about age verification, it is such a big issue. What do you think about what England is doing at the moment? Or let's talk about the UK as a whole, if you want. Are we doing it well? Do we have a good age verification process?
Well, I think that we don't have a process at all right now, and it is something everybody's scrabbling towards. I do want to make a couple of points about what we call AV now, age verification and age estimation. And that's the first point I want to make, is that there is this idea that age verification is a silver bullet to solve all our problems. And actually it's not. You know, that's like saying a driving license is the answer to
Yes.
bad driving and a lousy car with no headlights. You know, I mean, literally it's not. And so we have a big category error, and you know, we have a big category error about what AV is for. So if I say at the outset that what we want to have is a digital world that is built, you know, in a way that children can use, then actually the biggest driver is to get better services. And many of the things that children need and want are things that we would accept. It's just not in the financial interest of the companies. So I think that the first thing is you kind of got to go, actually, looking after kids is a price of doing business. Yeah. And you can't exploit children, you shouldn't harm children, and you should look after them. So in the AV debate, we have to keep our eye on that horizon of what does good look like, because then actually you get into a much more proportional thing. You do not need the date of birth, the birth certificate, the parents, you know, to let a child send a message to another child, you know, in Legoland or at the you know, the BBC, you know what I mean? It's like the environment is good, they've got moderation, lots of things aren't enabled, they're not introducing private messaging, etc., etc. And so the better the services, the lower the bar. So actually, age estimation is actually fine. And there's a lot of age estimation nips and tucks that you can do to make sure that actually you're not being cheated in the system. And a lot of that is happening in the background. Now, actually, if you want to spread porn, sell knives, guns, etc., you know, hold people's money, you have to actually know who you're dealing with, or you need to know they're an adult, or you need, and each one of those things is a different level of assurance. And so what I think we're going to find as we go forward is that there'll be general purpose sites with self-declaration, with all the bells and whistles that make it actually quite a good system and a very low bar of risk. And it'll graduate all the way up to actually, if you want to buy a knife, yeah, you have to prove who you are or how old you are, because at the moment, and I thought one of the most scandalous stories was the one where a child went on to choose a knapsack, a school bag on Amazon, and they went, you might like this, and it's a knife, because they're being brought together. You know, I think it is sort of, you know, if you start thinking about it logically and in terms of business and risk assessment and what we do everywhere else, it's actually a lot less mysterious and a lot more just simply arduous. And one of the things we're fighting for is child risk assessments across the digital sector in the online harms bill.
Very, very good. So you just brought up the knife and the rucksack. I had heard of that. Do you think big tech is doing enough in relation to accountability?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Everything they do, I welcome, but there has to be a seismic shift of intention. Yeah. So the intention at the moment is to do as little as possible to keep the regulator stroke government stroke whomsoever happy. Yeah. And the intention actually has to change. And I'm afraid it has to be looking after kids, price of doing business. I would actually say looking after users is a price of doing business. We do know this. There is consumer law. And I was desperate to say, when you made the point about Rwanda, is we have seen baby milk. We have seen cigarettes going to
yes, it's just one more threat heading that way.
This is business as usual, and the more we understand it as such, and the less we sort of play the exceptionality game, that is the game that has been introduced by big tech. At first, I think there was some logic to it. Now it's a cynical exploitation that actually you've just got to see them as business. You just got to see us as consumers, and you just got to get those consumer protections in. End.
It's music to my ears hearing you speak like this. So one of the really big things at the moment that are so topical about, we need knowledge and knowledge about all the other countries who may, be able to benefit from what we are doing, and learning from your suggestions. So data sharing is the really big thing. And it's felt across the board. I'm talking now particularly about behavioral addictions, but of course it is actually across the board, that if big industry were able to agree to sharing data, the problems would be very apparent, and or would become more apparent, and could certainly become facts rather than just opinions, which then could be targeted, evaluated, 6 monthly checked yet again and monitored. So would this be the sort of thing that you are also wanting to see, or is it more focused on the actual laws themselves and the protection of the individual?
So listen, I think it's an absolutely crucial point, and it doesn't get enough attention. And I want to just, for the purposes of illustration, just sort of mention the age limits online. In many countries it's 13, on some services it's 16, some countries it's 16, but somewhere in that range. And yet the research shows that that I think it was, and forgive me if I get the actual stat wrong, but about 53% of 10 to 12-year-olds have accounts with those very same companies. Now, one of the things is they've got the data, and you say, well, why aren't you kicking them off? And they say, well, we don't ask. The problem is not really, I mean, if you have all the data you need, and that's one issue. If it's self-harm, if it's gambling, if it's disinformation, if it's hate speech, whatever, the truth of the matter is, if you have the person who is making money out of the data be the only person to access the data, the asymmetry of power is so great. And then I end up in conversations with academics, and I can see what you're saying because you're already alluding to it. And they go, but we don't have proof. And then you go, well, hang on a minute. How long do we let the people with the data sit on the data, and then we don't act because of the fact of proof? So the real answer to your question, sorry, Etta, is this. Actually, I in my in the foundation, myself and my colleagues, we're actually asking for regulatory information gathering powers. We're looking for a review of exactly how we can share privately held data, and we think the principle of public interest for independent research, because a second and connected problem is the person who holds the data pays for the research,
has the money to pay for the research.
It has a funny habit of coming out a little bit how they would like it to be. I do think all of that is true, but the precautionary principle must apply. I am not prepared to wait another couple of decades while we battle it out about who gets to see what, when, on what basis. And in the meantime, every child in the land is sat like this and interrupted through the night. It doesn't work like that.
Precautionary principle, absolutely. And it's very, very hard without the data. Even yesterday, a discussion of this type was taking place where, you know, we were trying to work out whether something could be deemed harmful enough without having causation proven. Well, you know, it doesn't have necessarily to be proven in order to know something is potentially harmful and potentially should be avoided. Yes.
So that this is a really important thing, and I'm going to refer back to that same project that I told you about. One of the things that we think is really important for people to talk about is risk. Yeah, risk is a harm that has not yet happened. Yeah, harm is a risk that you let go.
Yeah.
Right. And so when we say risky by design, you go, actually, you know, if you have millions and millions of kids on sites where the default setting is to public and that people can see their rooms and their interests and direct message them and so on, the truth of the matter is most of those millions and millions of kids will be fine. Yeah. But those that aren't fine, is it an acceptable risk to let a company, for no other reason than to advertise, yeah, to automatically put a kid on display to 500 million people who can direct message them? The answer to that question is no. So we've got to start talking about risk.
Beeban, brilliant, brilliant. I'm so glad. I love hearing you speak. Now, I'm going to tell you a few lovely things that have come through. Okay, so Sheila Hollins saying one problem with AV is that it doesn't recognize the needs of adults who may be at risk too. Very good point. Hold on to that. I'm going to read you a couple of lovely comments. Lily Wilkinson, my very first time on here, I was recommended by a colleague to attend. What an inspiration for and rewarding, especially your interest in children and their well-being. Glad someone is out there fighting their corner and looking out for them. Thank you so much. Someone from Germany writing in saying, Professor Dr. Mark Barron saying a really inspiring and pleasant conversation. And Maya Laska Warfish saying, hi Maya, by the way, saying a storytelling narrative as a tool to connect and understanding, such essential tools. So you're really reaching out into various households, Beeban, even without us all being in the same lecture theatre. Could I just bring you, we've got a few minutes left. Would you like to answer Sheila's question in any way?
Absolutely. And hello, Sheila. And I think I would like to shout out to Sheila because she does the most incredible work for people with different abilities and people who have accessibility needs and so on. I mean, absolutely wonderful. And you should look her up and look at her work. I do think it is an issue. I do think that some of the things that we would like to see in place for children could be appropriated for that purpose. Yeah, I also think that if we can drive certain general areas of the internet to be generally more acceptable, that is also helpful to adults who may not be able to manage other circumstances. And I particularly want to say, and I'm afraid I did say this to someone in Silicon Valley not so long ago. I said, the problem is right now that we don't know where we are and we don't know where we're going. And actually, if you go out into a high street, you know, you don't just see a highway. What you see is a cafe, you see a pub, you see a restaurant, and you might see a strip club, and you know the benefits and risks of going into each one of those. And I think that the digital world we want to see, apart from being generally less intrusive and nudging us a whole lot less, is one that actually starts to categorize itself about where it is. And that will help all users, adult, children, accessible needs or not, to actually be the place they want to be. And I would support some of the more extreme places being available for those that want to be in them. Fine.
Very good answer. Thank you for that. And what a good idea. We'll have to invite Sheila here one evening to carry on that conversation. Now, to finish, I will just check if there are any other things that are important. Let me just ask you about the Digital Technologies Committee that you sit on in the House of Lords. Maybe you could teach us a little bit about what its what the scope of that committee is. What are they wanting to achieve? Is it completely in line with what you are doing? Is it you driving it? How does that work?
Yeah, so I think it's a really interesting and one of the most sort of, I'm trying to find the right word, useful, functional, brilliant things in the House of Lords is actually the committee system. And there are different committees. And for many years, I sat on the Communications Committee, and we did a number of different inquiries into digital matters. But that particular committee that you're talking about, which has now completed, the Digital Democracy Committee, was actually looking at our concerns about how the digital system and the digital players were impacting on democracy itself. And so I think that, you know, you probably had to be, you know, I don't know what you had to be to miss the American election. It went on for so very, very long. But, you know, if you look at the role of disinformation, yeah, actually, if you look at sort of right now, if you think about some of the anxieties around the vaccination and whether people are willing to be vaccinated because of the misinformation in that context. And if you look at some of what's happened, you know, in relation to some of the really sort of ugly things that have happened underneath advertising that have sort of propelled things that in other circumstances we wouldn't allow, or indeed the thing that I've been looking at recently, which is in the gaming environment, that's where a lot of far-right activists are now trying to pluck off children. Yeah. So, you know, that there's just a little
Thank you.
of the kinds of things we look at.
That's fantastic. So lovely to hear about all that work being ongoing, and great to have you let us know about it. So we're going to end now, but I just want to read you the last couple of beautiful comments. So one comment says, wonderful to see the RSM reaching so many parts of the world. Well done, RSM. So that's fantastic. And then I'd like to end on a more literary note, or film literature. Farad Naini says, what is your favorite book that hasn't yet been adapted as a film? If you have one.
Well, I'm going to embarrass myself because the very last book I read was so beautiful, and it was, but I can't remember the title. And it was a quote from a William Blake. You finally, on the question, you've got me. For many years, I'm going to say this, for many, many years, it was the Poisonwood Bible.
Oh, lovely book. Absolutely amazing.
But if that person gives their email in the chat, I will tell them.
I tell you what I'm going to do. Once you remember and you let me know, I'll tweet it out. I'm Art Science Doc, easy to remember, and I'll be tweeting out Beeban's choice. That's a very nice way of ending it. I want to thank you so much from all of us. People have really loved. There've been comments coming through the whole evening. Thank you so much for being with us, Beeban. And I also wanted to remind everyone tonight that next week there will be another interview. It will be with Mervyn King. It will be Professor Roger Kirby, the president, who will be holding the In Conversation live on that night. And just to close, I really want to remind all of you, the Royal Society of Medicine provides these evenings free of charge, but really welcomes donations to continue with its educational drive. What you see tonight is only a tiny bit of all that happens during the day in more medical academic settings. To donate, you can follow the link, scan the QR code on your screen, or go to our website and click the Support Us link. You can also become a member if you're not. You can be an associate member. And I want to thank you tonight for being with us and for your generosity, and wish you all a very good evening.